There's time for one more question, and that question is from Mitchell Sandquist, way back there. He's a junior, he's an international studies major, and how do you see voter fraud affecting the 2008 and future presidential election?
Voter fraud?
Yeah.
This is a really critical issue. And there are a number of things that have to be done, and we've done some of them. First of all, we made the decision to go after Republican secretaries of state. When I was coming up in politics, it didn't matter if the Secretary of State was a Republican or a Democrat, because every Secretary of State that I knew believed that their duty was to count the votes properly and to make sure that the outcome was just, whether it was a Republican or Democrat counting and running made no difference. Recently, we've seen an ugly development, particularly in Florida and Ohio, but in other states as well, where the Secretaries of State have become partisan and even gone so far as to chair campaigns in which they counted the votes. And as Joseph Stalin once said, it's not the vote that counts, it's who counts the votes. And so we have actually gotten ourselves involved in Secretaries of State races and replaced the Secretary of State in Ohio and in California and in Minnesota. That's had a good effect, because first of all, the Secretary of State in Ohio fired the entire Cleveland Board of Elections, which was thoroughly incompetent, and by coincidence had the Republican state chairman as a member of it. Secondly, the California Secretary of State banned voting machines that you can't tell what happens once you pull the lever. And so it's the biggest state in the country bans those black box voting machines, those depot voting machines. That means we're going to have honest voting machines again, which is important, and they do exist. Thirdly, for the last few years, we have put together a lawyers' council of 7,000 lawyers who work for us pro bono after some training in election law, and they're able to go to any voting place, and I sit on my desk on election day, and people on the internet email me and talk to me about polling places where they think funny business is going on, and sometimes we know about it, sometimes we don't. We send lawyers over there. This year we did something different. We used the substantial network we have all over the country to assess voting procedures in every single precinct in the country, so that we would go to officials and say, how do you assign voting machines based on population? What are your rules for counting absentee ballots? What are your rules for mail ballots? If your state has an ID law, what are your rules for that, and what do you expect? And we know ahead of time where the problems are going to be now. Now, the truth is, even though there's been well-publicized voting fraud in places like Ohio and Florida, most of the problems in the ballot box are not because of voting fraud. They're because of under-training and under-resources at the voting place. So we can now know a year before the election and talk to the secretaries of state, especially the ones that we believe are honest, whether they're Republican or Democrat, and say, look, here's where you're going to have trouble because your folks just aren't trained and they don't know the law in your own state. I'm convinced that Claire McCaskill, the senator from Missouri, would not be the senator from Missouri today were it not for Robin Carnahan, who is the Secretary of State, who for 6 weeks ahead of time met with all the election clerks and said, this is our procedure, this is what you have to train your poll watchers to do, and if you have problems, we're going to go through this again and again and again. So voter fraud is an issue, and it certainly has taken place, but the bigger issue is under-resourcing and under-training, and that we can do something about. Let me just close by saying this. There has been a tendency, because of the atrocious leadership we've had in this country in the last 7 years, to be pessimistic about the future of America. I am not pessimistic about the future of America because of you. I know the younger generation always is wondering about what they can achieve. You are an extraordinary group of people. I'll just tell you one quick story about this. So I go to Los Angeles. My job is to raise a lot of money for the Democratic Party. So I meet with a bunch of young people in their 20s and early 30s who are making zillions. One's a 29-year-old hedge fund manager, et cetera. One invented something which I actually may have turned out to be YouTube, because I didn't know what YouTube was when I went out there. This was a few years ago. And so they asked me, what they can do besides writing checks. And I said, well, we're having a problem with, shall we say, one of the news networks that appears to be mostly aimed at propaganda rather than news. What would you do about that? They said, it's not a problem. You're never going to duplicate their infrastructure with billions and billions of dollars. It's too expensive. So you simply hook up 100,000 computers, and you do it a news program every night, and then you let the readers edit it. And I said, well, we can't do that. We want our message out there. He said, okay, you don't have to let the readers edit it. You just have to update it so that people can turn on the news on their computer and watch it anytime in a 24-hour period that they choose, continuously updated. And we won't put it over the broadcast. We'll simply, we know that the maximum you can do is 70,000 videos out of a particular computer. So we'll just hook up 100,000 or a million computers, and that way we'll have a worldwide broadcast of your news program. I thought to myself, there is nothing wrong with this next generation. Here, I mean, that is the solution. And tomorrow, most people aren't going to turn on their computers for the news, except for your generation, which watches Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, and the internet for the news, which is a big improvement. And we thank you for that. But 10 years from now, it would not surprise me to go home to a flat screen TV and push a couple of buttons and watch whatever evening news that you wanted to over essentially your computer. The internet is the most extraordinary agent of democracy since Gutenberg invented the printing press 6 centuries ago. It is extraordinary. This is about, politics ought to be about empowerment. Empowerment of everybody so that nobody has to feel when they read the newspaper in the morning that they don't have any effect on what happens in their lives. You want to get people of your age to vote? It's just like getting people every other age to vote. Connect what goes on in Washington politics with what happens in their daily lives. It's happened in your age group because of what the Republicans attack on Pell Grants. It needs to happen everywhere. And then make sure that ordinary people know that they have the power. That you indeed have the power. And the way you have the power is that you are more powerful than any generation in the history of the world because of the net. Because an individual has more ability to come together and create communities on the net that has ever existed in the history of mankind, and faster. That is what's going to make this country a great country. And it's going to have the additional effect of safeguarding our democracies, because ultimately the Chinese people and the Iranian people are going to have that at their disposal, and if they don't, you can't modernize. So the governments of places that are authoritarian places in this world are going to have a choice either not to keep up technologically and become first world powers, or and by depriving folks of access to the net, or to become democracies and first world powers at the same time because of the democratizing power of this invention. And you are the ones that are the masters of this. I mean, I supposedly in the internet campaign, this dirty secret about my campaign is we weren't the internet campaign. What we were is smart enough to see what you were doing and follow you so closely that you felt we were leading you. That is the truth. You organized all over the world and all over the country for us. People know me in Europe because of what you all did. And you organized that, and we saw what you were doing, and we thought this is the way to do campaigns. We didn't invent how to democratize and decentralize campaigns. You invented that, and we were smart enough to figure out what you were doing, and that's going to be the model of future campaigns. Thanks very much.
Thank you.